All right. Hi, this is Chris Heineken, bringing you a new installment of our Insight Track series. And the goal of the interviews is to bring market trending from thought leaders in industry and technology around analytics, machine learning, and how companies are evolving to be more data-driven with intelligent systems. And so joining me today is David Gibbons. David, great to have you on. Great to see you here. David is the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Salesforce and focuses on Einstein and Tableau. And before we get going, first I want to say a couple thank yous to you, David, for working with us over the last few years. It's been great working with you. You've helped us get our message out to the Salesforce install base, provided us a ton of advice along the way. And so it's been great working with you. Thanks for joining us.
So pleased to be here, Chris. Thanks for inviting me on. And it's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure, in fact, to work with you guys. I think the Atrium team is really phenomenal. And the kind of depth of knowledge that you guys have about AI and how it can be used in practice is rarer than people think. So we're always excited to have a partner like Atrium.
Well, thanks for saying that. So I guess first topic of mine, just credentializing a little bit. You've seen a lot of the progression around analytics and AI with Salesforce, I think. So from Wave to Einstein to Tableau, there's a lot of change there. How has your role and your involvement evolved over the years as you've supported the marketing function there?
Yeah, that's a great revisit of history, right? Because Wave is where it started, and I think that must be 5 or 6 years ago now. It's definitely been a voyage. I think it's probably fair to say that when Wave was first introduced, it was maybe slightly overpromised. It was offering to do things for people with analytics that it wasn't quite ready to do. And it really came into its own when it became Einstein Analytics, which is just 3 years ago now. And Einstein Analytics was the moment at which it was rebranded. It was sort of like many things changed about the platform, many things changed about its capability. It was rebranded. But most importantly, it was also just refocused. It really focused in on how does analytics and AI support the business user who's working in the CRM. And that's quite a bit narrower than where it started, because it originally had ambitions to be a very broad analytics platform like the other analytics platforms that I'm sure folks listening to this podcast are familiar with. But it was a good retargeting. It really did drive home, what can you use this for, and why is it special and different, and how exactly does it serve the needs of that user who's working in the sales or service CRM in a specific way. And to me, that's really kind of where the product started, if you know what I mean. It really, like I said, came into its own and it became a true thing. And everyone at Salesforce kind of oriented around that and realized that's the value we can deliver. That's what customers will care about. And let's just make sure that the conversation is about that a lot. And it actually took a little bit of time after that rebrand and that reintroduction before the AI piece was fully embedded in, but that was kind of the second big evolution, right? It became about not just analytics for people who work in CRM, but about providing AI together with analytics that, as they like to call it in the trade, augmented analytics, and providing that level of intelligence that makes you even better at the tasks that you're trying to accomplish in the CRM. And it's combining those both, I think, that really kind of has changed both the role for us working at the company, and also has changed the position that it has in the market and really driven its success a lot. And that's a lot of change in just a short period of time. And now here we are in October 2020 with another change to announce. And in this case, it's mostly a rebrand change, right? We rebranded it, as you noted, to Tableau CRM. And that was driven by the fact that Tableau was acquired by Salesforce last year. And we recognized, despite the fact that we had built something especially with Einstein Analytics, we recognized there is no better brand for people who are not familiar with the landscape of analytics that we've been operating in. There's no better brand to communicate to them that this is a great analytics tool than to call it a Tableau tool. And that's what really motivated that change. And to identify it within the Tableau product line, we attached the CRM at the end so that people could distinguish it from other Tableau products like Tableau Data Prep and Tableau Server and Tableau Online, and to make it clear that this is the version that you would use if you're working in CRM. So a big change in terms of the name, but not really a fundamental change in its mission or its target or what it's going after.
Well, so it sounds like it obviously started with analytics in context to CRM data, then moving into predictions and algorithm development and trending and predictions in the context of CRM data. And now it's about scaling that into a much bigger platform with Tableau. It's kind of feels like that's the progression you've described.
Right.
And as a marketeer, I got to imagine that top of mind for you is messaging that you want to really come across to the market. And as you think about, the things that you want people really thinking about firsthand when we're talking about Tableau CRM now, how do you think about that messaging relative to maybe some of the other analytical plays out there, machine learning platforms? It's a crowded market. So what are you all trying to have as your kind of signature messaging?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a crowded market, like you say. There's, it feels like there's thousands of analytic vendors. It feels like there are lots of companies offering AI to solve some sort of specific problem. It feels like customers are often left on their own to put those together into some sort of coherent whole, particularly if they feel like combining the AI and the analytics is what's actually going to get them the productivity that they're in search of. I think the difference with Tableau CRM is we are focused on that business user that's working on sales or service. A lot of analytic platforms approach it from the, unlock your data, get your data out of silos and provide access. And that's great. And of course, it's essential to do. It's something that our products do as well. But in our minds, for that business user that's working on a Salesforce Service Cloud or Sales Cloud, they don't really think of it like that. They're not really, you're not coming at it from the point of view of like, oh, I wish I could get my data out of silos. They're an individual contributor, very often a salesperson or a service agent, and they're just trying to figure out where can I get the assist that makes me smarter about this interaction that I need to have with customers without having to do a lot of research. So if you said to them, your data is unlocked, it's over there, go and research what you need to know about this customer before you get in there, they would feel like that's really not a solution. And that's to me, that's what's different about the Tableau CRM approach. It's kind of like we package that up into like very actionable stuff that's tightly tied to the action that you're in the middle of right now.
Yep.
And we try to orient around like, just deliver that insight, whether the insight is a bit of historical data about what's been happening with this customer or what's been happening with this service case, or whether it's a recommendation that's based off predictions about how you can tackle this problem or what you could do to make this interaction better and more positive for the customer. We try to wrap it up in that. So it's less about, most of the analytics vendors are pursuing the unlock the data and get it out of silos. And we're pursuing the, how do we give you something that makes you better, faster, smarter, or more effective at your job? And how do we deliver that right when you're in the middle of the task that the problem you're trying to solve for the customer? And that's really what's very different about it, I think. And when you take that approach, the other big difference that you see is many analytics companies portray the unlocking your data as kind of the view that your C-suite wants, right? It's like all the executives in your company can see this data and get their handle on how the business progresses. But again, for the frontline worker, they're like, I don't need to know how the whole business is doing. I need to know how my accounts are doing. I need to know what's going on with the stuff that I'm supposed to be responsible for. So that they don't respond to that message as well. And that's why we focus on that end of driving productivity and really thinking about the individual contributor from the business user perspective.
That's great, David. That connects with kind of how we see the world, right? It's one thing to be able to extract insights from data silos. That's great, but that's kind of table stakes. The real value is how do you put that insight into, I think you used the word action a couple times there, into something that is actionable in a setting like in a sales and marketing setting that somebody can actually do something with at scale. That really connects with what I think we see in the market as well. So thanks for explaining that. Curious. So all of this has been going on with the pandemic, and any kind of changes in your approach towards messaging or how you're looking to help customers as their patterns are changing, their algorithms may be changing. What are you seeing as a result from the install base from COVID?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, what a year it's been, right? It's just been, no one could have predicted the way that things have turned out and the effects that it's had. It's just so profound and far-reaching. I think it's in the early days as the pandemic was unfolding, what we saw from customers was just like people within a couple of weeks, people were like, okay, I know things are going to change, and I know it's going to be profound, but I don't quite know how they're going to change. So let's just hold up for a sec and assess the situation that we're in. And it did initially lead, I think, to a pause while everyone was waiting to see what kind of a downturn will we experience. As we've all learned, the effect has been has been dramatically different depending upon the industry that you're in. Some industries have even seen a boost from it, right? And some industries have seen obviously serious downturns and very hard times. But the key to that is like, it's sort of different for everyone. You can't just, it's not like you can look at the overall economy predictors and go, this is how it's going to go. You can't look at predicted growth rates for the economy overall, or how the stock market's doing, or any of the traditional financial indicators. You can't apply them to your own situation. And what that meant was that after the first few weeks went by, people quickly turned back to like, okay, we need to understand what these changes are going to mean for us. And we need a very specific and tailored answer. We really need to be able to drill into like, how is it affecting our business? And we want to do that based upon what we're seeing in behavioral changes in the way that we interact with customers. And we want to be able to do that as quickly as possible. So that naturally gives rise to like, okay, I need analytics about what's happening, and I need to be able to look at that in a data-driven way. And I need to do it quickly. It can't be a project that I kick off and that I come back in 3 months to see what did the survey say. So that's a really great use case for the kind of very self-serve and rapid deployment analytics that we're specialized in. And of course, products that run in your CRM, they inherently have that data trail already of like what's happening with customer interactions and how is a lot of that changing. And because it's easy to bring in external data to add to that view, you can get to that view very quickly. So we pivoted in terms of how we were talking about the product. We pivoted to like, let's use analytics to stabilize, to understand what's changing. Let's use analytics to help us understand how we can work remotely, because as soon as customers felt like we've assessed where we're at, they started to plan their digital workplace approach and how they were going to work more effectively remotely, as it became clear that we'd be doing that for several months. And now, of course, they're starting to plan how and when will we be returning to work in the traditional sense, and that those are all processes that are greatly advantaged by just having that very current understanding of how things are going, what has really changed, what's remained the same, and of course some kind of prediction about how things will change in the future.
Yeah, well, that's great perspective. I'm curious. So you mentioned that some industries are doing much better than others. As a category, curious your take on analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Do those categories benefit from this whole pandemic that we're going through, or does it make it so that the adoption of it is slower? Any point of view there?
Yeah, I mean, what we definitely saw was, like I said, like first few months, okay, hold everything. People paused, people held their breath for a certain extent. That really only lasted for 2 or 3 months. Then we saw, frankly, an explosive return to people kind of going, yep, it's clear that we need these digital tools. And it was a combination of, we need to assess very, very currently and very reactively, we need to assess what's changing and where we're at, combined with, and we need that augmentation, because now that we're planning remote work, remote work, of course, has been normal for some people, but many different categories of workers, suddenly it became like the main thing that they did was remote work, and they were more used to being in an interactive environment where they could bounce ideas off their colleagues. When you don't have that as much anymore, what you're looking for instead is like, well, how can I get the expert insight that I would get from turning my chair to Brad and saying, hey Brad, I'm thinking about doing this with this project or deal, what do you think? That's not as easy anymore. But when you're a remote worker, you need more collaboration, you need more analytics to help you understand what's worked in the past, and you value the prediction that you can get from an AI that suggests here's what you could do to improve that, particularly if it has been tailored to match the patterns that your company is in. Because if you can tailor an AI prediction or recommendation to do that, you are effectively getting the smartest workers in your company, but on every single action, on every deal, and on every service interaction. And I think that's what people are really wanting, is that, as they digitize and do more remote work and settle into that pattern, they want more of that. So it's definitely been like a growth vector for analytics and for AI overall, I would say.
It sounds like if you're betting, you'd probably bet that trend continues. Like the whole investment around digital AI, machine learning, analytics is a part of that journey and will benefit from all of this. That kind of leads me to maybe one more question, thought around just the future. So here we are, fall of 2020. Typically, this is a time where we're thinking about big events like walking the streets of San Francisco, Moscone around Dreamforce. That's obviously not going to be happening this year. We're bummed about that. But I'm curious, as you think about 2021 and beyond, Any thoughts on market direction around analytics and machine learning that you think about as you consider, the next year or two?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we'll see is, as we've all experienced, there are companies who felt like what they did couldn't effectively be done remotely, and they've learned now that some of that can be done. That doesn't mean that they're going to want to stay that way forever, but I think it does mean that there'll be a permanent shift in the degree to which they believe it has to be done in offices, in face-to-face settings versus remotely. So I feel like that demand that drives the need for analytics and AI will continue, but that it will continue even as we see the true return to work and workplaces opening up more. And we'll see, of course, a more flexible approach to workforces generally. Employers will be more inclined to have a mixed approach where they don't necessarily need to declare that someone is work from home versus work in the office. And that mixture, of course, just raises the need for digitization generally, and that drives the digital workforce and digital working practices in general drives those two things. It drives the availability of data that you can make great analytics and great predictions around, and it also drives the need because you want people to feel like they have the support of that information no matter how they're doing the work that they've been asked to do. So so in terms of like what we'll see as we get back to work, I expect people will also see a change in their business as they get back to work, and they'll have just the same need in almost a more positive fashion to analyze what are those changes bringing to our business and how are things changing. But they'll still want to continue this kind of drive that they've seen to understand better through analytics and to have predictions to help them. And I'm imagining, Chris, that you guys have seen that too. I mean, let me ask you this: would you say that the range of questions that you and the team receive about, like, can AI help me to predict XYZ, has that range broadened in the last few months, and do you expect it to stay broad in the future?
There is no shortage of ideas or questions for like what could the use cases be. In fact, our biggest challenge is how do you bring those together, kind of normalize them so that people can understand like what are the high traffic use cases that they can go implement first. And so for us, we've seen a real convergence around three primary use cases throughout this year around anything related to customer acquisition, anything related to customer retention, anything related to predictive forecasting. Those are the three, but those are the most common. We see hundreds of others. So it's been interesting to watch all those get inventoried. And it's also very interesting to watch that you've got kind of those meta problems that across many different verticals, but then you apply industry lenses to them and then they get even more powerful. So the whole notion of customer acquisition in a higher ed space is around enrollment, right? And how do you really do the best job you can with enrollment? That looks very different and potentially in a technology space too. So it's been interesting to see the industry permutations play out.
Yeah, actually, you guys have always been amongst the leaders in terms of finding those interesting use cases, like the educational use cases you're referring to for predictions and what they can do. And I think what we're seeing now, especially since we recently introduced this integration of bringing Einstein discovery predictions into Tableau dashboards, which suddenly blows Einstein discovery predictions out into this whole realm of other areas that Tableau customers use data, which is far outside of just the sales and service use cases, the predicting of what customers will buy and the propensity to close and those kinds of use cases. And we're seeing like just a massive expansion in questions that are frankly sometimes even challenging to answer. Right? It's like, can you make a good prediction about this using this tool?
Sure.
We're really having to stretch that way, but it's an exciting stage to be in, right? Where people are asking you if the tool can do new and interesting things in medical practice, for example, or recommending patient prescriptions, any of those kinds of things where it's sort of like, yeah, traditionally we haven't done that much in those areas, but we're super excited to get into them and make sure that the tool can deliver value in a safe and ethical way, but can deliver value for that kind of predictive space as well. And I'm excited that we have partners like Atrium to help us navigate it, because you do have to go deep to answer these questions sometimes.
Well, really appreciate all your perspective here, David. So you've given us, obviously, we got the progression over time. You've been instrumental in shaping the messaging around Wave, Einstein, now Tableau. It's great to get your perspective on, the times that we're going through, how that's going to impact the market, how we should be thinking about that as we get into 2021. So we learned a ton from you. Thanks for joining the Inside Track here, and we'll look forward to staying in touch with you.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Chris.